It is the middle of the night, and one man is standing completely alone beside a small river, waiting for a war he cannot win. His name is Jacob, and by sunrise, 400 armed men will be marching straight toward him, led by his own brother, the one he betrayed 20 years ago. Jacob has already done everything he knows how to do. He has prayed. He has sent gift after gift ahead of him, hoping to soften a heart he broke long ago. He has split his family and his servants into 2 separate groups, so that if one is destroyed, the other might still survive. There is nothing left to plan, nothing left to arrange, nothing left to control, and that is exactly the moment when something unexpected happens. Before we go further, tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching this from tonight. We would love to know. Out of nowhere, in total darkness, a stranger grabs him, not a soldier, not his brother, not a thief looking for an easy target. Genesis 32:24 describes it in the simplest words possible. A man wrestled with him until the break of day. No warning, no explanation, no introduction, just 2 bodies locked together in the dark, and a fight that will last through the entire night. For centuries, people have read this story and walked away with one lesson: hold on tight, and God will eventually give you what you want. Jacob refused to let go, so Jacob won. It sounds inspiring. It sounds like a formula for faith, but it is not what actually happened, and it is not even close to the real point of this passage, because when you slow down and look carefully at the original language, at the actual words used in this scene, a very different and far more disturbing picture starts to appear. The man Jacob was wrestling with was never in danger of losing, not for 1 second, and the wound Jacob walked away with was not a mistake, an accident, or a side effect of a long struggle. It was placed there on purpose. So tonight we are going to walk through this encounter, piece by piece. We are going to look at a wordplay hidden in the original Hebrew that completely disappears once it gets translated into English. We are going to examine exactly who this mysterious opponent was, weighing every piece of evidence the Bible actually gives us, including the places where the text stays deliberately silent. We are going to ask a strange and important question. Out of every part of the human body, why did this stranger reach for Jacob's hip? And we are going to follow the consequences of that single moment, all the way to a butcher shop operating somewhere in the world today, nearly 4,000 years later, still shaped by what happened beside that river in the dark. But to understand why this fight ends the way it does, we first need to understand the man on the ground, because his entire life had already been building toward this exact night. To understand why this fight happens, you have to go back to the very beginning of Jacob's life, because nothing about that night beside the river was random. Jacob was born holding onto his twin brother's heel, as if he were trying to pull him back and climb out first. His name literally means the one who grabs, the one who takes what belongs to someone else. Think about carrying a nickname your whole life that quietly describes your worst habit. That was Jacob's reality from the day he was born. He grew into that name step by step. When his brother came home starving one day, Jacob did not offer him food out of love. He made him trade his entire inheritance for a bowl of soup. Later, he went even further. He covered his arms with animal skin, walked into his blind father's tent, and pretended to be his own brother, just to steal a blessing that was never his to take. His father, unable to see him, asked a simple question: "Who are you, my son?" And Jacob looked him in the eye and lied. That single lie changed the entire direction of his life. He had to run. He fled to a distant relative's home, and for 20 long years, he lived under a man who deceived him just as easily as he had deceived his own father. He worked for the woman he loved, only to be tricked into marrying her sister instead. His wages were changed again and again. Imagine building a career for 2 decades, only to feel like the ground kept shifting under your feet every single time you thought you had finally gotten ahead. Jacob left that life quietly, in the middle of the night, running once again, this time heading home. And home meant facing the one person he had wronged the most. The place where all of this comes to a head is not some vague, symbolic location. It is a real river, one you could still visit today, cutting through a rugged valley in what is now the region of Jordan. And here is where the original language reveals something English simply cannot show you. Jacob's name in Hebrew sounds almost identical to the name of this river, and the word used for wrestling in this exact scene sounds like both of them combined. It is as if the location, the man, and the struggle were all built from the same letters, on purpose. There is another detail hiding inside that word for wrestling. It appears in only one other place in the entire Bible, connected to a word that means dust, as if the writer wanted you to picture two bodies grappling on the ground until they are completely covered in it. It is a striking echo of the very beginning of the Bible, where a human being is formed out of dust in the first place. So who is this stranger? The text calls him simply a man, not a vision, not a dream, nothing symbolic. Yet by the end of the encounter, he does something no ordinary man has the authority to do. He renames Jacob. And in this story, that kind of authority belongs to God alone. He blesses him, and Jacob himself, shaken and relieved to be alive, names the location face of God, convinced of exactly who he had been wrestling with. A prophet writing generations later looked back at this same night and used 3 different titles for this figure in a single breath, laying them on top of each other rather than separating them. Ancient Jewish tradition offers one explanation for who this figure represents, while a long-standing Christian reading offers another, seeing this as an early appearance of God himself in a form a man could physically touch. Both deserve to be taken seriously, and we will walk through that evidence carefully. But whoever this was, one thing is already becoming clear. Jacob was not wrestling a stranger in the dark. He was about to come face to face with something far bigger than himself. This is where most people misunderstand everything that happened that night. Genesis describes the moment the fight turns with a single line. When the stranger saw that he could not win, he reached out and touched Jacob's hip, and the joint came apart instantly. Read quickly, it sounds like a desperate man losing a fair fight and resorting to a cheap move to end it. That is how this scene gets taught most of the time. But look closer at the actual word used for that touch. It is not a word for a strike, a blow, or a violent grab. It is the ordinary, gentle word for touch, the same word you would use for placing a hand on someone's shoulder. One soft touch, and a fully grown man's hip comes out of its socket. So ask yourself something uncomfortable. If one gentle touch could do that, what does it tell you about everything that happened during the 6 hours before it? It tells you the entire fight was never actually close. Whoever this was could have ended the struggle in the first few seconds, at any point he chose, and instead let it continue for hours. Picture a professional fighter sparring with someone who has never trained a day in his life, taking punch after punch, blocking just enough to keep the match going, never once landing a real hit in return. From the outside, it might look like an even contest. From the inside, one person already knows exactly how this ends. That is the picture hiding underneath this text. Jacob spent an entire night believing he was holding his own in a real struggle, when the truth is that his opponent had been holding back the whole time, on purpose, from the very first moment. Why would anyone do that? Why let a fight drag on for hours instead of ending it instantly? Because Jacob needed the struggle itself. Fighting was the only language he had ever truly known how to speak. He had been grabbing, maneuvering, and forcing his way through life since before he was even born. A shortcut here would have taught him nothing, so the stranger let him fight, all night long, until there was nothing left in him but exhaustion. And then comes the harder question. Out of every part of the human body, why the hip? Start with the obvious physical answer. In any wrestling match, the hip is where your entire strength comes from. It is your center, your balance, your base. Touch a man's hip the right way, and you have not just hurt him, you have taken away his ability to fight at all. But there is a deeper layer sitting underneath that one. This was never Jacob's first time depending on someone's lower body. He came into the world holding on to his brother's heel. He built his entire identity around grabbing, tripping, pulling other people down by the leg to get ahead. And now, in the dark, the one thing he is finally forced to hold on to for survival is not someone else's leg. It is his own broken hip and the stranger's arm around him. Notice something else about the timing here, because it matters more than it seems. The injury happens near the end of the struggle, not the beginning. Jacob does not get hurt, and then start desperately holding on. He starts holding on only after he is already broken, which means the injury was never meant to stop him. It was meant to make holding on the only option he had left. Then something happens that changes the entire tone of the night. With his hip broken and his body running on nothing but exhaustion, Jacob refuses to let go. He says, out loud, in the dark, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Think about that for a moment. 20 years earlier, this same man got a blessing through a costume and a lie, whispered into the ear of a father who could not see him. Now, with nothing left to hide behind, no disguise, no trick, no plan, he is asking for one directly, in his own voice, under his own name. The man who once stole a blessing is now begging for one. There is a detail about this moment that the book of Genesis never actually mentions, but a prophet writing generations later adds it in, almost as an afterthought. Jacob was crying, not gritting his teeth in stubborn silence, not clenching his fists in defiance, but weeping, openly, while holding onto a stranger he could not overpower. That single detail completely changes how you should picture this scene. This is not a strong man forcing a reward out of heaven through sheer willpower. This is a broken man, on the ground, in tears, with both arms wrapped around someone far stronger than himself, asking for mercy he knows he has not earned. Then comes a question that lands harder than anything else that night. What is your name? On the surface, it sounds simple, almost unnecessary. Why would anyone need to ask a question they already know the answer to? But this is not really a request for information. This is the exact same question Jacob's own father asked him decades earlier, in a different kind of darkness, when Jacob lied without hesitation. This time, there is no disguise to hide behind, no brother's identity to borrow. And this time, the answer is just one word: Jacob, the grabber, the one who takes what is not his. Saying that name out loud, admitting it, describing exactly who he had been his entire life, is the actual turning point of the whole story. Not the wrestling, not the injury, this one honest sentence. And immediately after that confession, everything changes. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the stranger tells him. From now on, your name is Israel, because you have wrestled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. Stop and consider how strange that statement really is. Prevailed. Jacob did not win this fight in any normal sense of the word. His hip is permanently damaged. He is on the ground, crying, clinging to another person just to stay upright. If this counts as winning, it is winning the way a drowning person survives, not by defeating the water, but by refusing to let go of the hand, pulling them toward shore. Jacob then asks a question of his own. "Tell me your name," he says, and the answer he receives is another question in return. "Why do you ask my name?" Nothing more is given. The identity of this stranger remains just out of reach, wrapped in the exact same mystery that opened this entire encounter. Jacob had spent his whole life taking hold of everything he could reach. This is the one thing, in the end, he is never allowed to hold on to. Jacob gives that place a name before he even stands back up. He calls it the face of God, because in his own words, he has just come face to face with the divine and somehow lived to tell about it. That name is not just a detail to move past quickly. It is the key that unlocks everything Jacob does next. Because Jacob has spent his entire life terrified of one specific face, the face of the brother he betrayed, the face now marching toward him with 400 armed men. His entire survival plan, every gift, every group of servants sent ahead, every careful arrangement, is really just one long strategy for managing that single face. And here is the twist nobody expects. Before Jacob ever has to face his brother, he is forced to face something infinitely greater, alone, in the dark, with no gifts and no strategy to hide behind. If this part of the story is landing with you, take 2 seconds and tap the like button before we go further. It genuinely helps more people find this. Now watch what happens just a few hours later, when the sun comes up and Jacob finally sees his brother standing in the distance. Instead of the rage and violence Jacob spent 20 years dreading, Esau runs toward him, throws his arms around him, and both men break down in tears. And then Jacob says something almost impossible to explain any other way. He looks at his brother and says that seeing his face felt like seeing the face of God. The exact same words, the exact same phrase he used just hours earlier beside the river. The face Jacob had spent 2 decades running from turns out to be wrapped in the same mercy as the face he had just wrestled in the dark. There is something remarkable hiding underneath the surface of these 2 scenes as well. The word used for wrestling that night and the word used for Esau embracing him the next morning are almost identical, separated by a single letter. It is as if the struggle and the embrace were always meant to be 2 versions of the same event, one violent and hidden in darkness, the other tender and out in the open light. Then comes a line most readers skip right past without noticing. As Jacob crosses over that place, the sun rises on him, and he is limping. Compare that to years earlier, when Jacob first ran from home under a setting sun, a young man with everything still intact, a liar with nothing broken yet. Now he walks back into the light of a new day, completely changed, physically damaged, but carrying something he never had before. And here is the detail that stops most people cold once they notice it. Scripture never records this injury being healed. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. Jacob walks with that limp for the rest of his life, leaning on his staff even decades later, on his deathbed. The wound never disappears. It simply becomes part of who he now is. There is one more piece to this story, and it might be the most unexpected of all. To this day, thousands of years later, there is a Jewish dietary law that comes directly from this single night beside the river. Because of what happened to Jacob's hip, a specific nerve is removed from meat before it can be considered fit to eat, through a difficult and specialized process that few butchers are even trained to perform. In many places, it is easier to simply set that entire cut of meat aside than to attempt it. Somewhere in the world, right now, while you are watching this, someone is carefully following a rule that exists only because one man was wounded beside a river almost 4,000 years ago. Most reminders in Scripture are things people are told to do. This one is different. It is a reminder built entirely around something left out. An entire nation still shaped, generation after generation, by a wound that never disappeared. So what does all of this actually mean for you tonight? First, understand that sometimes, when you feel like you are stuck in an exhausting struggle instead of getting a clear answer, that struggle itself might be the answer. Jacob prayed a sincere, honest prayer earlier that same night, and what came back was not a simple response. It was a fight that lasted until sunrise. If you have been wrestling with something for a long time, do not assume you have been left alone in it. Second, notice that the wound and the blessing came from the exact same hands. We like to separate our lives into 2 categories, the good things and the painful things, as if they come from 2 different places. This story refuses to let you do that. The same encounter that left Jacob permanently changed is the same encounter that gave him an entirely new identity. Sometimes something has to be taken from us before something greater can be given. And third, remember that the turning point of this entire night was not the fighting, and it was not the injury. It was one honest sentence. Jacob was finally asked who he really was, and for the first time in his life, he told the truth out loud. There is real freedom hiding in that moment, because you were never asked to hide what you have struggled with. You were only ever asked to finally say it. Jacob walked away from that river that morning limping, forever changed, carrying both his old identity and his new one at the same time, because that is what real transformation actually looks like. It does not erase where you came from. It walks forward with it, changed, but never pretending the past never happened. If this story opened your eyes to something you had never noticed before, take a moment right now and tap that like button. It genuinely helps more people discover this. And if you have ever felt like you were wrestling through a long, exhausting night of your own, leave a comment below and share it, even if you would rather stay anonymous. Someone else watching tonight needs to know they are not alone in that fight. And if you want more studies like this one, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss what comes next.